Daniel chapter 11, and it's a bit of for us it's a history lesson. For Daniel it was prophecy. And I think it's important, this is the sort of place where we've got to in the book of Daniel, where you some may kind of wonder, why are you going into this, so in depth, some of the things that I'm going to look at. Because Daniel gives these prophecies that have been fulfilled. And what they are, when we look at this, and we look at this portion of what is history for us, it is a confirmation of Scripture. And I hope you realize how powerful this is. The book of Daniel, the writings of Daniel are confirmed to be, their antiquity is confirmed. It's accepted. And obviously, there are those that would like to say these must be forgeries. These had to have been written after the fact, because those people reject anything that might be considered supernatural or miraculous, right? But Daniel, God's prophet, prophesied these things with such accuracy. And this is a portion that we're getting into. You remember he was down by the river Hiddekel in chapter 10, known today as the Tigris River. And he's still there here in chapter 11. And this is the final vision. Daniel's in his 80s, and so he's quite aged, and he's been mourning and fasting and praying by the Tigris River. And three angels appear to him, and they strengthen him. He begins to fall, he begins to stumble, and they keep touching him and strengthening him, and they've come to answer his prayer. We talked about last week, if you weren't here, listen to that. I put it up on YouTube, that spiritual battle in the spiritual realm. It's alarming, a bit frightening when you think about those things. The scriptures don't speak to that truth, those things very often. And we don't get a ton of insight into the spiritual realm of angels and what we might call demons or devils, and how things affect our prayers and how our spiritual walk is affected, the struggle that we have because of the powers of darkness. Even though Paul, declares it in his writings boldly, he doesn't really give us an understanding of it, the principalities and powers of the air. What does it mean, that Satan is the god of this world, those sort of things, and that he walks about seeking whom he may devour, as Peter wrote. And so we see some of that going on in Daniel's life as he prays here for 21 days. And so these angels come, and they do reveal great prophetic events of the future times. Both the nearer future, in the ensuing centuries, but also the far future concerning Jerusalem. So in chapters 11 and 12 of the book of Daniel, his final vision, part of it is a reiteration of some previous revelations that these angels had revealed to him. But the ultimate purpose of the final vision is to show Daniel God's plan for the last times and the long plan of God for the nation of Israel. And so God is not done with Israel. God is not done with the descendants of Abraham. God is not done with Jerusalem. The portion of the prophecy that has already been fulfilled, it has been the source of much debate, obviously, much debate. That the writings correlate with history is accepted by all, whether it be believers like you and I, that if we look at this, we study this, we compare this, we lay this across history, and it's sort of like where the writings of Daniel rise and fall, so history rises and falls, and it fits like a glove that was custom made for our hands. But those who reject this as prophecy, they say, well, the writings, they must have been come at a much later date, they're forgeries, that sort of thing. But what I would say to you tonight as a believer is as sure as God's word is, and that these things that we see have been fulfilled, then we can rest assured that what God still intends and purposes, that he's also going to accomplish that. And those are the things that are yet to come. So there's no supporting evidence that would cast any doubt on the time of these writings. The only evidence against these being legitimate prophecies is the preference of those who reject anything miraculous on their atheistic or agnostic or secular principles. So anyone who does not accept that God divinely spoke of future events through his prophets, they would feel it necessary to reject the ancient origins of this book. But it is the premise of all Bible-believing Christians that Daniel wrote of these events well before many of them occurred. And so we keep in mind tonight as we study this and we look at this, that much of what was prophetic here to Daniel is now historical. I know when we think of prophecy, we think of, it's going to be fulfilled in the last days. So Daniel was actually given quite a bit of prophecy that has been fulfilled from our current perspective. And so this is, it can be tedious to go through it thoroughly, and we won't get through chapter 11 tonight, at least not through my notes. They're super extensive. But here, an outline of chapter 11. Daniel is shown and given prophecy concerning the Grecian monarchy here in the beginning of chapter 11, and the personage that we know historically as Alexander the Great. And then in the second portion of this chapter, the affairs of Egypt and Syria under Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Nicator. And the rise, and as I already said, some of this repeats previous things that were shown to him, but the rise and success of Antiochus Epiphanes, who was a prototype, a type of Antichrist, in verses 21 through 29 of this chapter. The mischief done to the Jews by Antiochus Epiphanes is expounded upon in this chapter, and then his fall, the fall of Antiochus Epiphanes. Man's final key. These are among man's final kingdoms. Of course, nearly 2,000 years has ensued, and this is a time that Jerusalem has suffered many troubles and desolations. And of course, we know we have a nation again today, a state of Israel. We know that God is working. But chapter 11 continues where chapter 10 left off. So the vision is continual. The angel is still speaking with Daniel by the river. Daniel is ready to receive the message. He's been strengthened. And so though the intended ultimate end of this prophecy, this vision is far future, here are some events of a more near prophetic fulfillment again shown. And so Daniel, here in the chapter, has two parts. Verses 1 through 35 is the historical, covering the time from Darius the Mede, which we learned about in Daniel chapter 6, until Antiochus Epiphanes, which is about 175 to 164 BC. Then the second part, Daniel 11:36 through the beginning of chapter 12, covers the last Gentile ruler who will be in power at the time of the return of Messiah. We don't know who that is. That Gentile ruler known as the man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist. And I believe that we're close to that time. The period of time between Antiochus IV and the rise of the last ruler is really sort of just passed over in Daniel chapter 11, verses 33 through 35. And then it emerges there in verse 36 of this chapter, the last Gentile king to the coming of the Messiah. The Messiah, who is the stone which crushes the feet of the composite man in Daniel chapter 2. So we'll begin here, read a little bit as we go and see how far we get tonight in Daniel chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. Daniel says, "Also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia," or Greece. 3 more kings. Daniel is now in the 3rd year of King Cyrus, 536 BC. The angel tells Daniel 3 more kings are to rise in the Persian kingdom. And since Daniel is already in the reign of Cyrus, we know now, looking back, as I say historically, the following 3 kings, and they are Cambyses from 529 to 522 BC, Pseudo-Smerdes from 522 to 521, a 1-year reign, and then Darius Hystaspes, who is mentioned in Ezra chapters 5 and 6. Here in the text, he speaks to the 4th being far richer than they all. The greatest of the Persian kings was Xerxes the first. Xerxes is the king identified in the book of Esther, and led a major expedition against Greece, as is stated in the prophecy, but had disastrous results. According to Daniel, Xerxes' reign was the climax of Persian rulers. From him, it was basically a downward spiral from which Persia never recovered. Xerxes spent 4 years preparing for his attack on Greece, gathering thousands of soldiers and vast riches, as is stated in the prophecy. So we consult some secular documents. Encyclopedia Britannica gives us a chronology of the events surrounding Xerxes. And so I'll read from that. Xerxes then turned his attention westward to Greece. He wintered in Sardis in 481 to 480 BC, and thence led a combined land and sea invasion of Greece. Northern Greece fell to the invaders in the summer of 480. The Greek stand at Thermopylae in August of 480 came to naught, and the Persian land forces marched on Athens, taking and burning the Acropolis. But the Persian fleet lost the battle of Salamis, and the impetus of the invasion was blunted. Xerxes, who had by then been away from Asia rather long for a king, with such widespread responsibilities, returned home and left Mardonius in charge of further operations. The real end of the invasion came with the Battle of Plataea, the fall of Thebes, a stronghold of Persian forces, and the Persian naval loss at Mycale in 479 BC. Of the three, the Persian loss at Plataea was perhaps the most decisive. Up until Mardonius was killed, the issue of the battle was probably still in doubt. But once leaderless, the less organized and less disciplined Persian forces collapsed. Time and again in later years, this was to be the pattern in such encounters, for the Persians never solved the military problem posed by the disciplined Greek hoplites. Harem intrigues, which were steadily to sap the strength and vitality of the Achaemenid Empire, led to the assassination of the great king in 465 BC. And so for the modern day student of the book of Daniel, the study is basically a great lesson in world history. Much for the reader to learn, and the divine origin of the prophecy has been proven by the very events that were revealed through Daniel centuries before they took place. The attack on Greece that I just read about from the encyclopedia, that attack would stir in the hearts of Greek descendants seeking revenge for generations. The attack on Athens and the burning of the Acropolis would be met by the greatest descendant Greece would ever know, Alexander the Great. And his rise is spoken of here in the text, Daniel chapter 11, verse 3. Now we just read about the attacks by the Persian kings. 3 would ensue after Cyrus, and those attacks would come upon Greece. Verse 3 of Daniel chapter 11, and a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those. Here we have a man who's described as a mighty king. Now the attacks on Greece from Persia caused, as I said, a sense of outrage, simmering in the hearts of the Greeks. Alexander the Great's father, Philip of Macedon, before his death, had laid out plans to attack Persia. And so Alexander, from his childhood, from his earliest years, was raised to hate the Persians for their attacks on Greece over the years. And in 10 years, Alexander was able to destroy the Persian Empire and establish the Greek Empire, which became even much larger than Persia. Only after his men refused to go any further did Alexander return to Babylon to solidify his conquest. He planned to solidify his empire. He encouraged his Macedonian soldiers to marry Persian women, and Babylon was to be the capital of his Greek-Persian empire. We read these words here, that his kingdom shall be broken. Now we read about these successes, the prophecy of his great success, but it says his kingdom shall be broken. By the time Alexander the Great was 30 years old, he had conquered most of the known world. But it's always been said by historians that he could not conquer himself. Before Alexander could follow through on his plans, he died in a drunken spree in Babylon at the age of 33 years old. After his death, his generals fought over his kingdom. 4 generals surfaced to take control of the kingdom. This is confirmed in history. You'll note in the text that it says in verse 4, his kingdom shall be broken and be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. And so his kingdom was divided to 4 generals who surfaced to take control of the kingdom. And this is borne out through history. Cassander assumed rule over Macedonia and Greece. Lysimachus took control of Thrace, Bithynia, and most of Asia Minor. And Seleucus took Syria and the lands to the east, including Babylon. Ptolemy established rule over Egypt and possibly Palestine and Arabia Petraea. 4 winds, these 4 winds would signify all directions, and so his kingdom was parceled off. Now it mentions here in this that we just read his posterity. His posterity. It said his kingdom would be left and scattered to the 4 winds, but not to his posterity. Alexander had 2 known offspring. So you might think rather than the generals, it would go to these men. Hercules, the son of Alexander from Barcina, and Alexander from Roxanne. Roxanne, after Alexander's death, had Barcina and Hercules killed by a man by the name of Polysperchon. Alexander, the son of Alexander the Great, was born after his death from Roxana. Roxana and her son were later murdered by Cassander, one of the generals that took a portion of the rule, one of his succeeding generals. After Alexander's death, Roxana had his second wife, Statera, killed, and she gave birth at Babylon to a son, Alexander IV, who was accepted by the Macedonian generals as joint king with, I don't know why this is in the historical documents. I'll explain what it is. With the idiot Philip Archidaeus. And this man was known as an idiot because he had diminished mental capacity. And Philip the idiot never held any positions. There's no way for us to know what he suffered from or what it was that caused this. But the fact that he was given in the family, though he would have had right, but not given any military or political positions, and this title is attached to his name, would indicate that he suffered from something that diminished his mental capabilities greatly. In 319, Roxana joined Alexander's mother, Olympias, in Epirus, but she was captured in 316 in Macedonia by Cassander, who later took the title of King of Macedonia. He imprisoned Roxana at Amphipolis and then executed her and her son. And so we see that none of this was left to his posterity, these 4 generals. And the reason I bring all these details is there's just little things that are said in the text that probably, how in the world ahead of time would you be able to apply that? No. But when we look back on history, that literally everything that's said has been fulfilled to the final details. Verse 5 says, and the king of the south shall be strong. Now we're talking about these various rulers, Ptolemy here, Seleucus and Nicator. Verse 5, the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. The king of the south, following the death of Alexander, there was a period of time, about 20 years, when his successors fought for control of the empire. The 4 successors, Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy, divided the kingdom. The king of the south, Egypt, was Ptolemy I. Ptolemy aided Seleucus in regaining his kingdom from another general who tried to reestablish Alexander's empire under his own authority, and Antigonus. Now he says here one of his princes. Daniel says one of his princes. That would be Seleucus Nicator. He was ousted and fled to Ptolemy, and there as one of Ptolemy's generals, he was able to defeat Antigonus. Seleucus regained his kingdom, and according to Daniel, would become king of the north. Daniel gives us all of the details of this. He also says here that he shall be strong above him. Seleucus was able to secure the greater kingdom at the expense of Ptolemy, who initially aided him. Verse 6, and in the end of years they shall join themselves together. For the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. So we see here, they shall join themselves together. The wars between the king of the north, Syria, and the king of the south, Egypt, continued off and on over territory. They became known as the Syrian Wars. During the Second Syrian War, Antiochus II Theos sued for peace by agreeing to marry Ptolemy Philadelphus, his daughter Bernice. The problem was Antiochus II was already married to a woman by the name of Laodicea. He therefore divorced Laodicea and married Bernice. They shall join themselves together. We see that fulfilled in that act, these kings. The king's daughters of the south are mentioned here. Bernice was the daughter of the king of the south. The marriage took place in 252 BC. She conceived and had a son. The son was to take possession of both the northern and southern kingdoms. And when Ptolemy II died, Antiochus II restored his wife Laodicea, who then had Bernice, her infant son, and Antiochus II Theos killed. These were unbelievably violent people. We can see that. She shall be given up. The words that Daniel says here. Laodicea had her son Seleucus Calenius succeed her husband to the throne. So we see exact fulfillment of basically everything that Daniel says over a period of about 2.5 centuries. Verse 7, but out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail, and shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom, and shall return into his own land. So out of a branch of her roots, in verse 7, the brother of Bernice, who was killed by Laodicea, avenged his sister's death. He attacked Seleucus Calenius and his mother Laodicea, who ruled from Syria. He plundered Babylonia and went as far as the borders of India. Christian historian Jerome, in his commentary, provides a detailed description of Ptolemy, his conquest of the kingdom of the king of the north, which was a fulfillment of this prophecy. And here Jerome wrote, he came up with a great army and advanced into the province of the king of the north. That is Seleucus Callinicus, who together with his mother, Laodicea, was ruling in Syria and abused them. And not only did he seize Syria, but also took Cilicia and the remoter regions beyond the Euphrates and nearly all of Asia as well. And then when he heard that a rebellion was afoot in Egypt, he ravaged the kingdom of Seleucus and carried off as booty 40,000 talents of silver, and also precious vessels and images of the gods. That was spoken to in the prophecy, wasn't it? Images of the gods to the amount of 2,500. Among them were the same images which Cambyses had brought to Persia at the time when he conquered Egypt. The Egyptian people were indeed devoted to idolatry, for when he had brought back their gods to them after so many years, they called him Euergetes, which means benefactor. And he himself retained possessions of Syria, and he handed over to Cilicia to his friend Antiochus, that he might govern it, and the provinces beyond the Euphrates he handed over to Xanthippus, another general. King of the north, this phrase, king of the north. Several years after the Egyptian invasion, Seleucus Callinicus was able to mount a return attack on Egypt in about 240 BC, and Seleucus was defeated and returned to his own land and died in 226 BC. We could take a piece of history for literally every statement that is made in this ancient prophecy and see that it has been fulfilled. This is building to the end of the vision in chapter 12, where we're going to read about the last Gentile ruler, a descendant of those that destroyed the temple, typified, in other words, by Rome, of European descent. Daniel chapter 11, verse 10. We'll see how far we get here tonight. I don't have a clock because it's not working. Verse 10, but his sons shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. And one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. For the king of the north shall return and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mountain, take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many. But a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land. But he shall stumble and fall, and not be found. And so let me draw out just a few of the things that are said here. I read a good portion, but a few of the key phrases here that we've seen fulfilled historically. His sons. Despite Seleucus Callinicus' failure to attack Egypt and win, his sons, which are mentioned here, his sons were able to do what he could not. Seleucus III, his son, died in battle in Asia Minor. Antiochus III, the Great, succeeded where his brother and father failed. Antiochus III began what became known as the Fourth Syrian War. Daniel says one shall come. The one is this Antiochus III who waged war against Egypt, the king of the south. The king of the south was Ptolemy Philopator, I guess is how you'd say it. Antiochus III first took Lebanon in 219 BC and pushed south toward Egypt. The Egyptian ruler assembled a large army and met Antiochus at Raphia, south of Gaza. The Egyptian army, led by Ptolemy and his wife/sister, Arsinoe, resulted in a complete victory for Egypt. Now, this text indicates a large army. The armies both numbered about 70,000 men. The multitude. Antiochus lost his entire army and fled into the desert. Egypt reclaimed southern Syria for the time. Here the king of the north is mentioned again, and so Antiochus now turned his attention to the east part of his kingdom. His campaigns against Bactria and Parthia gained him the title of the Great. In 203 BC, Ptolemy IV and Arso had a mysterious death. Their son Ptolemy V succeeded them. He was 7 when he took power. Antiochus saw his opportunity at this and assembled a greater army than in his failed attack in 217 BC against the child king. The Jews rebelled against the Ptolemies and the violent men of your people, as they're called here in the text. The gates of Jerusalem were opened for the armies of Antiochus who attacked the Egyptian garrison at Jerusalem. Scopas, the Egyptian general, was decisively defeated in 198 BC by Antiochus. The prospect of Roman intervention forced Antiochus III to make a treaty with Egypt by marrying his daughter, the daughter of women, Cleopatra, to Ptolemy V. Antiochus had the idea her son and his grandson would become king. He had hoped that Cleopatra would help him, but his daughter sided with the Egyptians against her father. He would turn his face to the isles, Daniel wrote. And so after his victory over Scopas, Antiochus now turned to the growing Roman threat and attempted to conquer Greece, the Isles of Greece, and equal the work of Alexander the Great. The Roman consul Lucius Scipio defeated Antiochus III in 2 battles, the first at Thermopylae north of Athens in 191 BC, and again at Magnesia on the Meander River in 189 BC. This paved the way for Roman expansion into the region. And Rome forced Antiochus III to pay tribute for 12 years and turn over his son Antiochus IV as a hostage. Antiochus III turned back to his own land. Hoping to raise more money, he plundered a temple in Elam and was killed. I don't know if he was killed by Elam, but he plundered a temple and was killed. Verse 20, it says, "Then shall he stand up in his estate, a raiser of taxes, and the glory of the kingdom. But within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Now isn't that, some of these prophecies are so specific. Then shall he be destroyed, neither in anger, neither in battle. In his estate, his son, in his place, his son Seleucus IV took the throne. Forced to pay tribute to Rome in the amount of 1,000 talents annually, he taxed all his domain. Here in the text, it says he shall be a raiser of taxes. He had to do that because of Rome. He taxed his domain heavily. He raised special taxes on the Jews, administered by Heliodorus, who plundered the temple in Jerusalem. Seleucus Philopator suddenly died. After that, some suspect he was poisoned by Heliodorus. In other words, history tells us that he died very suddenly, and suspicion was poisoning. In the prophecy, it says that within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. And so his death, the manner of his death, confirms that. We're going to stop there. I know it's just a lot of history, and as I said, I'm not really preaching, but I think it's fascinating. We're going to continue next week. We'll go through some more of this history, but then what it leads us to is what we're living in expectation of. It leads us to what we're living in hope of. And it is an answer to Daniel, because Daniel wanted to know. Daniel was involved in this. Daniel was in Babylon. He was under Persian rule. And so he's praying not only about his homeland, but how all this was going to come out. And so the angel comes, and he basically lays out the next several centuries for him, which took place exactly as God, because God knows everything. God sees everything. Everything is present with God. There is no timeline for God. His eyes are in every place, so not just every physical place, but everywhere and at all times. And so God sees the future. And so men are beginning to say, as the New Testament tells us, they'll question, where is the promise of his coming? The Bible says in the last days there'll be mockers and scoffers. Don't be among them. Don't give up your hope. We have what the Bible calls a blessed hope, and that is the glorious appearing of our Lord Jesus Christ. I believe we're on the verge of this time of Jacob's trouble. I believe we're on the verge of the tribulation period, and therefore I believe that Jesus is coming back. And I long and look for the kingdom. And so, as sure as these prophecies were fulfilled, the remainder of Daniel's prophecy is also going to be fulfilled. Let's stand together tonight, and we'll pray.